Okay, here we are at the pets controller. However, we're doing this a lot. We're always picking these fields with our asJSON method. So right now, the default asJSON method just isn't doing it for us. So if we're going to get it working and get it in a nicer fashion, we really want set to set asJSON to only render these fields by default. So to do that, we can use the magic of inheritance, and we can go to our pet model, and we can create an asJSON method. And it does take a parameter as a default. And what we can do is we can just return the parent classes, but use our hash here as the default. And so now, if I go to my Rails console, actually pet.all.first.asJSON, it only gives me the ID, the name, the age, and the fact that the human is Ada. Well, that's okay. The problem is we're ignoring our parameter. So if we did decide to render something different with options, it's going to ignore it. And that's no good. Well, one of the things we can do is we can combine the options they give us with these defaults. We can simply use the options.merge method, the hashes merge method. And so now it'll take the options given and combine it with the default ones. And we can test and make sure it's still working. Yep, Peanut still works. And so by overriding the parent classes asJSON method, you can then go back into your controller and reduce asJSON to that. And there we go, making our controllers a little bit simpler and easier to understand. The other thing we can do is we can go to our model, and we can also put in some validations, because we want to make sure that every pet has a human, a name, and an age. If we do that, we have to test it. And in that case, we can start building some tests. So if I put my test in here, I could write my test this way. So basically, create a pet, refute that he's valid because he doesn't have a name yet, and then we can do we can assert that the errors include the name, but it could be another validation error. And now if I test this, I get an error because my include here has to have a question mark at the end. It's include huh, and now it works. And I could copy and paste this for every field that is required. That's my life is too short for that. I could, however, because this, if I look, in each of those tests, this would be repeated, this would be repeated, this, everything except the instance variable, and this also gets repeated except for the instance variable here, the field that I'm checking. So what I could do is I could make an array here, and I could turn this.
Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Turn this into a loop. And I can just put in the variable here, dot to sim. This would convert it into a symbol because the fields are symbols. And that's okay, because it'll check all my validations for required fields. But, you know, this is the only thing that's different for validations that are not just required, that are something else. The message is the only thing different. So I can build a helper method. So I can go def assert validation, and it takes a model, and it's going to take these lists of a list of the fields to check, and I can also check the error message. So the first thing I would do is check to see if the model is valid. And I'll assert so basically exactly the same.
So
and now my test just becomes if I check it, that should hopefully work. But it doesn't because the name is assert validation. So now I can do the same thing for any fields that have to be numeric, for fields that have to be greater than 0, any kind of validation I want. I can run this way. I can test this way. The only problem is it doesn't tell you which field failed. So If I put parentheses here, if a field does fail, it'll also include the field and the message, the validation message. And I can then, if I have a validation that isn't good, like say I take off age, when I run the test, it'll tell you age can't be blank. So you can take the same concept to build these rule helper methods to dry up your assertions, to dry up your tests, so that each of your tests are short and they test everything that's required, and that they're also very specific and they tell you what failed. All right. Thank you and happy testing.